Question 1.
Hey guys, and welcome back to yet another episode. In our usual tradition of looking at weird versions of games, today we're going to take a peek at Quiz & Dragons Capcom Edition. You may have played the regular edition of Quiz & Dragons in the past, but what makes this one unique is that it's filled with Capcom-related questions only. You'd think that in any normal case, something like this would be a novelty and maybe have like one or two stages from the arcade game, but no, it's the full arcade game. All the levels, all the bosses, just with video game questions the entire time. So at this point you may be asking yourselves, okay, well, how do you play the Capcom Edition? It was released on the good old Capcom Classics Collection Volume 2 that came out back in 2006 for the PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox. We are going to be looking at the PS2 version today specifically, but both are pretty much identical from what I understand.
Question 8.
The original Quiz & Dragons came out back in 1992, and believe it or not, the arcade that I worked at back in my high school years actually had the cabinet. It was a really fun game to play back then at the time, and it was a nice change of pace from a lot of the other stuff that was around. I remember we all used to take breaks from Street Fighter 3 and play Quiz & Dragons, among many other things.
One issue with the OG Quiz & Dragons is that some of the questions are just all over the place, and a lot of the categories had repeats and such, making it so that later playthroughs were pretty easy to win by just memorizing the limited number of answers. The Capcom Edition is refreshing in that sense because you get all new questions pertaining to tons of Capcom's games throughout the years. I honestly think that this version of the game is the most fun, especially if you play it with someone else who really knows their Capcom history. The way you play the game is pretty simple. You just pick one of 4 starting characters and roll a dice during each of your turns to move along the spaces on the board. There are different types of spaces that do different things too, like of course enemy encounters, elves that will give you helpful items to assist with the next set of questions, and even an inn that'll let you fill back up on health if you're running low. The numbers in the corner of the monster squares all correspond with how many questions it's going to take to defeat them. The cool thing is, if you have the special items you need, you can do things like eliminate a few of the choices to make some of the questions easier if you're in an unfamiliar category.
And like you just saw, you can even choose the category if you have the right item too. These items also work on bosses and ends up making things go much quicker in the long run.
The visuals hold up quite well for a game that's 30 years old. It's all bright and colorful with interesting characters and art design. Each area on the map has a unique look, and having the ability to change your path at times definitely helps to up the replay value, since you do want to see everything. Same with the music, some really excellent stuff here, which it needs to be since the game itself is kind of passive. It gets stuck in your head, but in a good way. One of my favorite Capcom soundtracks from the early 90s.
Question 4.
Not much to talk about here when it comes to the gameplay and control, since the game is essentially menu-based. Each face button on the controller relates to one of the 4 choices on screen during the quizzes. Just a heads up though, be sure to check your controller setup before getting started. It's not set up by default in like a 1, 2, 3, 4 pattern like you'd think it would be, and it'll totally throw you off unless you know which button does what.
Question 9.
So yeah, that's Quiz and Dragons Capcom Edition. Pretty much the same thing as the regular Quiz and Dragons, but with even more Capcom flavor, which I mentioned earlier makes it more fun, especially if you're a big Capcom fan like I am. Pick this up on the old Capcom Classics Collection Volume 2 on either console. It's still pretty cheap and has tons of other great games on it too, including the original Quiz and Dragons.
Question 13.
As always, I'd like to thank you all for watching, commenting, and of course subscribing, and until next time, stay classic.